to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest today, you've seen him here before, is Professor Marandi. He is a professor at the University of Tehran. Welcome back, Professor Marandi.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Sabrina.
So I think the first question I have for you is about the Tucker Carlson interview with the president of Iran. And from what I've seen so far, people in the United States in particular are losing it. People are calling for Tucker Carlson to be canceled. People are calling him a traitor. Why do you feel so many people are losing it over this interview that he's had with the president of Iran, given that Tucker Carlson interviewed Vladimir Putin just over a year ago? Why are people so upset?
Well, actually, the president's also getting a lot of criticism here for being too soft, but that's a different story. But I think the problem really lies in the fact that the United States has antagonized Iran. It has demonized Iran for 40 some years. In the case of Russia, um, it this after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it really wasn't much of an issue. And gradually, of course, the United States was expanding NATO, and they were planning against Russia, and increasingly the anti-Russian narrative began to grow. But it was nothing like Iran. Iran, after all, has been the axis of evil for a very long time. Many Americans have been brought up with a very negative perception of Iran. And it really doesn't matter whether it's Fox News or it's MSNBC. The narrative is the same. If you notice, when Trump and Netanyahu waged their wars against Iran, um, CNN was talking about sleeper cells in the United States. In other words, they were antagonizing Iranian Americans who have nothing, who most are not political. They're very quiet uh, people by and large, and they did that basically to mobilize the country against Iran. So it doesn't matter if it's Fox News or CNN. The language may be the same. It may not be the same. Fox News may be more bombastic, but it is extremely hostile. Uh, whether it's CNN or Fox News, or as I said, ABC, NBC, CBS, whoever. So the antagonism is universal. It sort of reminds me about Trump in 2016 when he was first elected. They said he was a Russian agent, a Putin puppet. But when he started firing missiles into Syria, suddenly everyone was pro-Trump. And the reason why Syria was so evil was because of Iran, because it was uh, somehow affiliated to Iran and the resistance against the Israeli regime. So if it wasn't for Iran, probably the Americans wouldn't have had such a universal support for destroying the country and for bombing the country and for supporting extremist groups there. So I think people in the United States, people my age, in the who are in the United States, they were brought up with an evil Iran, the mad mullahs, the ayatollahs, and how evil they all are, and they're out to kill us, they're out to get us, but they can't find the country on the map.
Right. Well said there. You mentioned that the president in Iran, I guess, is getting some type of pushback as well. Why are people criticizing him? You said that they said he was too soft.
Yeah, I think from what I've seen, a lot of people have been saying that he should have been more assertive about Trump, about the United States, about how we cannot trust the United States, how negotiating with the likes of Trump is not going to get us anywhere uh, because of the brutal aggression, because he was a partner in the crime. He was deceptive. He tried to fool the Iranians into believing that the negotiations were serious, and then quietly he was working with the Israelis to carry out mass slaughter in the country. When the attacks took place on the first night, they brought down apartment blocks just to get one person, killing tens of people. And then again, Western media, it doesn't matter if it's liberal or conservative, they were all talking about how the Israeli intelligence was carried out such a precision attack and how successful it was, whereas they just bombed apartment blocks where they knew a senior commander was living, which is no secret. People have homes, they go home at night, and so the point is that here he was criticized for being too soft. I understand why he spoke the way he did. I agree with some of the criticisms, but I also understand that he's speaking to an American audience that is sympathetic to Tucker Carlson, who's himself is anti-war. So while I think he could have said some things a bit better, but I also think some of the things that he said were useful. And from the comments, I didn't watch the last 5 minutes of the interview because something came up and I never had the time to go back and finish watching it. But I saw a few of the comments and they seem to be not bad. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. There's one part in particular here I want to get into when they bring up the question of having a nuclear program. I want to go ahead and share this here because I think this is the part where I think people just, again, I would ask the question, why do all these other countries get to have this? So I want to go ahead and bring in this part here from Tucker Carlson. This is at the very beginning.
Mr. President, thank you very much for doing this. There is a pause, or seems to be a pause, in the war between the United States and Iran. How do you think this will end? How would you like to see it end?
We did not start this war, and we do not want this war to continue in any way. From the very beginning, it was the motto of my administration that I always adhered to, and that was fostering the national unity inside the country and also fostering peace and tranquility and friendship with the neighboring countries and with the rest of the world.
The American President Donald Trump has said that the United States bombed your enrichment facilities because the government of Iran refused to give up its nuclear program, and that there can be no peace until Iran does give up that nuclear program. Would you be willing to give up the nuclear program in exchange for peace?
I would like to tell you what has happened, and it was Netanyahu since 1984 has created this false mentality that Iran seeks a nuclear bomb, and it has insinuated that Iran is trying to develop a nuclear bomb in the past, and it has put it in the minds of every U.S. president since then, and to make them believe that we would like to have a nuclear bomb. But the truth is that we have never been after developing a nuclear bomb, not in the past, not presently, or in the future, because this is wrong, and this is in contrast to the religious decree or the fatwa, which has been issued by His Eminence, the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, that so it is religiously forbidden for us to go after a nuclear bomb. And this was always corroborated thanks to our cooperation with IAEA, because they were always there that to verify this and to substantiate that we have never wanted a nuclear bomb. But unfortunately, this cooperation was disturbed by the unlawful attacks against our nuclear facilities.
Okay, so that part right there I thought was really interesting. I really appreciate the fact that he made it very clear from the very beginning of the interview that no, we do not seek to have a nuclear bomb, etc. But what I found interesting, that question from Tucker Carlson when he says, would you be willing to give up your nuclear program? I think that's the wrong question, because the question I think that should be asked is, why does Iran have to, you know, demolish their nuclear program, but everybody else is allowed to have one? And I think that's the question that Tucker Carlson should have asked. Now, I don't know when he's doing these interviews if the translator is right there next to him. I honestly don't know. So I don't know if he had a list of questions. He just asked those questions and then the translation is done afterwards. I'm not sure, but I feel like it's really important that I, express to my audience that we have to ask the right questions. And I feel like you shouldn't put this on Iran and tell them they have to get rid of their nuclear program. You should ask the elephant in the room, why is it that all these other, countries are allowed to have a nuclear program, but you are not? I think the fairness here needs to be brought up. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that is a flaw also in the in the way in which the president, the way in which the president also responded, I think, had its shortcomings, and he should have said and made reference to the fact that Iran has the right to have a nuclear program and enrich uranium in accordance with international law, in accordance with the regulations of the International Atomic Energy Agency and the NPT, and that Trump is not in a position to take away Iran's rights as a sovereign country. This is not the 19th century, and it's not the 18th century, and apparently Trump and NATO still think that this is the early 20th century or the 19th or 18th century, where the West can just simply destroy other countries and get away with it. Well, and they continue to do that. They destroyed Iraq, Libya, Syria. They tried to destroy Cuba, Lebanon, and so on. But in any case, you're right that the question is problematic, to say the least. Of course, maybe Tucker Carlson just wanted to see what the response would be, but I think probably the president could have done a better job in. I think the president should have done a better job in responding. Of course, it's easy to criticize because whenever I do interviews, I always finish. When I finish, I say I should have done it differently, or I didn't speak well, or I'm usually not happy with my own performance. So I don't expect the president to be perfect, but I think he could have done better.
Why do you think Tucker Carlson mentioned that he also reached out to Benjamin Netanyahu for an interview as well? For those who are not aware, it wasn't just him reaching out to the president of Iran. According to him, he said that he reached out 3 times and has yet to receive a response. Why do you think Benjamin Netanyahu is avoiding having an interview with Tucker Carlson, considering that I would say a good portion of Tucker's audience supports Israel or did support Israel, especially if we're talking about the evangelical Christians? Why is he dodging that interview?
Well, maybe he was afraid that what happened to Ted Cruz would happen to him too, because ultimately the logic of a genocidal maniac is going to be flawed, and these people they're used to speaking on mainstream media and legacy media, whatever it is. They are all going to be obedient to the narrative. It doesn't matter. I remember once upon a time there were some people who used to think that the BBC was somehow different from other media outlets, which is not at all the case. The BBC will be deferential to Netanyahu, and the BBC will speak to an Iranian leader with the assumption that Iran is a regime, that the Iranian leader is not legitimate, and they will be insulting and abusive to the Iranian, but they'll shake and nod their head when the Israeli regime's prime minister speaks. So if the Israeli regime prime minister speaks, they'll hold the mic in front of them and shake their heads. But if it's the Iranian leader, it'll be an Iranian leader. It'll be very different. That's just how it is. So why would Netanyahu think he has to go and speak to Tucker Carlson when he can go and speak in the White House, and all of the media outlets are simply going to reflect what he says, and then the commentators and the pundits are going to confirm that yes, the Iranians, this is the narrative of Iran. Yes, the Iranians want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, and their nuclear program therefore is a threat. It's very simple, done. And then ordinary Americans who don't know anything about the reality or politics, they'll believe it. Whereas the Iranians, of course, don't want Israel to exist. They want it to cease to exist. But like Rhodesia, but like apartheid South Africa, they want it to cease to exist. So a nuclear program has nothing to do with the fact that Iran wants this regime to stop being a ethno-supremacist regime, to stop carrying out ethnic cleansing, to stop carrying out genocide. But they will, whether it's MSNBC or CNN or ABC, this is how they'll frame it. They'll ultimately say, well, the problem is, so even if Israel bombs Iran, they'll say, well, Israel has the right to defend itself. Why? Because Iran wants to, Iran wants to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, and Iran has a nuclear program. So they can rape, plunder, kill, just like Gaza. The logic of Gaza is that Israel has the right to defend itself. And so did Nazi Germany based on that logic. Hitler had the right to defend itself. And all of the criminals in history had the right to, the southern states and the United States in the 19th century, they had the right to defend themselves. The conquistadors had the right to defend themselves. The South African supremacists, they had the right to defend themselves. That's the logic, basically. So mainstream media will give Netanyahu what he wants. He doesn't need to answer to Tucker Carlson, or he doesn't feel he needs to.
That's an interesting point. Another thing that was mentioned during this interview was if Israel tried to assassinate the president of Iran. I want to get into this part here as well, because I thought that this was pretty interesting here. Let me go ahead and share this.
Will not be given the permission again to attack us.
Do you believe the Israeli government tried to assassinate you?
They did try, yes. And they acted accordingly, but they failed. And as a true believer, I believe that it is in the hands of the God Almighty to determine when a person will die or will not die. If he wills, the God Almighty wills, then you can die when you are walking freely in the streets. And but I would like to tell you that I am not afraid of sacrificing myself for in defense of my country and in safeguarding and defending the sovereignty, the freedom and the independence of my country. I'm willing to give my life, to give blood for that. Nobody here, none of the government officials is afraid of losing their lives in line of defense. But will it bring security to the region? I mean, bloodshed, more bloodshed, assassination, killing others. Will it bring peace and tranquility and stability to the region?
With respect, can you tell us how you know that you were an assassination target? A week and a half ago, I don't believe I've seen that confirmed anywhere. How are you certain they tried to kill you?
Of course, it was not the U.S. that was behind the attempt on my life. It was Israel. I was in a meeting. We were discussing the ways to move forward, but thanks to the intelligence by the spies that they had, they tried to bombard the area that we were holding that meeting, in which we were holding that meeting. But as I told you before, it is God who wills when a person will die and give up his life.
Okay, that part right there. I actually believe the U.S. would have been involved in that with Israel, but that's just me.
No. I agree completely. I think that was also, um, he didn't have to frame it that way. The Israeli regime, all of its assassination attempts, all of its sabotage, all of the airstrikes that it carries out, all of the everything is done with the cooperation of the United States, with the not just the United States, the Five Eyes, Western embassies in our country collect information and pass it on, and these are shared. And in our neighboring countries, these embassies do the same. Some of our the regional countries that are proxies of the United States or which are subordinate to the United States, they cooperate with U.S. The U.S. intelligence agencies, and by extension, but with the Israeli regime as well. So this is definitely not something that the Israelis do on their own. It's very clear that without full support of the United States and the West, the rest of NATO and their proxies, the Israeli regime wouldn't be able to conduct any offensive against Iran. It wouldn't even be able to survive uh, its conflict with Hezbollah or Hamas or the Palestinian people at large. So it is with the full support of the United States, and I have no doubt that the intelligence that is passed on to the Israelis is most probably this sort of information is most probably passed on by the Americans.
Right. It kind of reminds me when Biden and Kamala were promising that, or they were saying they were pushing for a ceasefire. Remember that whole debacle? And there were some of us that tried to explain to people that you guys, like, Israel's doing exactly what the US administration wants them to do. And, people are like, no, just give them a chance, just give them a chance. And then it was earlier this year, it was revealed that Biden and Kamala never told them to stop dropping the bomb, never told them to stop doing that at all. So I think it is an illusion that some Americans may have to believe that the US is not behind what Israel was doing. They're 100% behind it.
Because the legacy media was giving out this misinformation on purpose in order because people were turning against the Israeli regime. They were turning against the Holocaust. And so they had to, on the one hand, make it seem like they were trying to do something. But at the same time, they were very firm in supporting the Israeli regime continue to carry out the genocide. It's clear as day that legacy media in the United States, as I was saying at the beginning, for example, when discussing Iran, legacy media in the United States is a tool of the powerful, and the powerful are in one camp. They may argue over abortion or some other minor issues, because when it comes to humanity and the destruction of countries and the rape and plunder of nations, these are really very, very minor issues. But both sides are on the same page when it comes to the dirty war in Afghanistan, supporting Al Qaeda, supporting the Taliban when the Taliban took over, supporting ISIS and Al Qaeda in Syria, in Libya, bombing Yemen, bombing Iraq, destroying Iraq. All of these were done by both parties. They're one party. Some like to think that they're different. They're not different. These minor internal issues are really unimportant when you look at the bigger picture. The United States has destroyed our region. It's destroyed our region. And every day people are being slaughtered. Just 2-3 hours ago, I saw this clip which I tweeted. It's really horrific. A young boy buried, half his body was buried under the rubble, and I couldn't watch it. I don't know if he was dead or not. But it's just happening day and night. Does anyone care? Does anyone in the political? I mean, are the Democrats blocking the genocide, or the Republicans blocking genocide? No, they're both the same, and all of the media outlets affiliated to these powerful people, they're the same. So we should have zero expectations, whether they're British or American or French or German or Australian. They're all going to say the same thing.
That's right. That's right. Another thing he did ask him, speaking of assassinations, was about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. So he did also ask him about that. I want to go ahead and show that as well, because I do think this is something that people need to hear.
Donald Trump. What does that mean exactly, and what do you think of it?
To the best of my knowledge, they have not issued decrees or fatwas against any individual or against Donald Trump. And first off, it has nothing to do with the Iranian government or to His Eminence, the Supreme Leader of Iran. Or what they actually meant by the fatwa was in condemnation of an insult to a religion or religious personalities, and they were actually saying that this is deplorable, this is unacceptable. So it was not directed towards the US president or any other individual, and there might be people with their own ideas and opinions, but I can assure you that the meaning of this fatwa should not be construed or considered as a threat against any individual.
Has Iran ever backed an assassination attempt against Donald Trump?
This is actually what Netanyahu is trying to insinuate and to make your people or the president of your country to believe. But this is wrong because Netanyahu, as I said, has its own agenda. It wants to drag the U.S. into forever wars, as I said, and to bring more insecurity, instability, and unrest to the whole region.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is ridiculous. Like this idea, whoever even came up with this narrative, which I believe originally started with Israel, that Iran tried to attempt assassination attempt against Donald Trump. I feel like Israel's just grasping at straws at this point, and they're just throwing anything out there to try to get the narrative back in their favor.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, and I personally think that there's a strong possibility that there will be some sort of false flag operation in the United States, so carried out by the Israeli regime or its supporters in order to mobilize public opinion to help Trump initiate some sort of conflict with Iran. I think that's quite possible. In fact, I think that probably Tucker Carlson, the reason why he asked this question is because he has that concern. And since he is probably the best, well, he's very well connected, probably better connected than any other journalist in the United States because of his relationship with Trump, to the intelligence agencies. And I'm sure he's probably heard things that made him put this question to the president. But it is quite stunning that those religious scholars, as far as I know, there was one in Iraq and two in Iran, who gave this fatwa. This fatwa was I haven't seen the fatwas, and I should have been I should have done my homework. If I had known you were going to bring this up, I would have done so. But this was in response to Trump threatening Ayatollah Khamenei. He said, we'll leave him alive for now, or so Trump is basically threatening to murder Ayatollah Khamenei, the leader, and he gives himself the right to murder, to slaughter, to threaten leaders. And then other religious scholars in Iraq, the first one who issued a response to Trump was in Iraq, and there were two in Iran. So this was basically a response. I think the president should have, again, he could have explained that a bit better, but it's obvious that there's no death threat. It's obvious that no one believed that the Iranians were trying to kill Trump. When he was assassinated, he himself tried to imply that it was his opponents in the deep state. That's what the people around him were saying, and it helped him become the president. I think it was Tucker Carlson who said after the assassination that he's now the president of the United States, and he was right, because that shifted the narrative in the United States. So Yeah, I think it's very clear that those, over the years, all these Iranian sleeper cells, where have where have they actually carried out assassinations? It's been 47 years now. So, like they're going to have sleeper cells for the next 200 years, whenever, and then they're never going to use them. And if you know they're sleeper cells, then why don't you find them and at least show one? After all these years, you could at least have discovered one of those cells and put them in front of the American people and say, this is one of the sleeper cells. It's all fake. This is all to prepare the grounds for further hostility, to make people in the United States hate Iranians, hate foreigners, hate whoever the United States wants them to hate, so that they can pursue policies that they want to pursue. And the people behind this are not people who care about American interests. They're people who care about Israel's interests, the interests of the Israeli regime. This is all about Netanyahu. It's all about Zionism and ethno-supremacism, and it has nothing to do with the interests of the United States. If it wasn't for Israel, the U.S. relationship with Iran would be completely different. Does Iran have any problems with Brazil? Does Iran have any problems with Mexico? Does Iran have any political problems with Nigeria, with South Africa, with Niger, with it's basically the United States, and the countries that don't have good relations with Iran are countries that are bound to the United States. Americans won't let them have good relations with Iran because the United States threatens them. If they have good relations with Iran, they'll sanction them. So this is all about Israel.
Yeah, even after September 11th, there was a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment in the United States. So the fear tactic definitely did work here at that point in time. And I think what's different now was just that I think in particular, a lot of the younger generation, they've really woken up. They know about the history of Israel, how it was created. They know about Zionism, the founder of Zionism. So they have really educated themselves on this issue. And I point to the younger people because that is the future generation. They are the ones that, hopefully they will educate their children differently. They will teach them the truth about what Israel is and what it has become. So I think that's what they really did not prepare for that. It's like they prepared for the generation of people who were around at that point in time, but they didn't think about the next group that would be coming after them. And I think that's what kind of caught them
Yeah,
off guard.
And if you look at even 9/11 or September the 11th and how Muslims were antagonized, all of those Muslims basically came from Saudi Arabia, and they followed an ideology promoted Wahhabism and Salafism, which was promoted by allies of the United States and used against countries like Iran, and an extremist ideology. And then a decade later, the United States was using Al Qaeda again in Libya and in Syria. And we know that, we both know and so does your audience, Jake Sullivan's email to Hillary Clinton on February the 12th, 2012. Less than 11 years, a bit over 10 years after 9/11, where he says in Syria, Al Qaeda is on our side. So after killing over 3,000 people in New York and creating such, devastation in downtown Manhattan, and then being the cause of endless wars, the United States, once again, within a decade, roughly after a decade, were aligning themselves to the same group. And so, those who are the young people, hopefully they'll bring about change, but the problem is that through repetition and through hearing the same thing over and over again in the different mainstream media outlets, they're all saying the same thing over and over again. So the assumption among many ordinary Americans is that yes, it's the Muslims. They don't think about, well, how about why are they working with these same terrorists again 10 years later? They don't tell that to the people, and so the people just have these very misguided ideas about Muslims. For example, I have Jewish friends. A couple of my Jewish friends, I have quite lots of Jewish friends, but when they speak about, for example, Judeo-Christian values, right? Great, but Muslims see Christ, or especially Shias see Christ as infallible, and they see that the Quran says that he was taken to the sky, he was taken by God, and that he will return. So, but somehow Muslims have no shared values with Christianity, and we're the enemy. Why? Because it's in the interests of the powerful in Washington for people to think that way. So the Jewish faith, which does not consider Jesus to have any positive attributes, let's say, that is okay. But Muslims are somehow evil and demonized. And the interesting thing is that the United States and the political establishment which promotes anti-Muslim sentiments, they are the ones who support Wahhabism, Salafism, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all of these extremist groups. But again, this is not something that you will ever hear on the BBC or Sky News or France 24 or Deutsche Welle or, I don't know, The Guardian or the Independent, let alone in American media outlets.
That's right. There's one more part here I do want to show you, and that was towards the end. Tucker Carlson did ask him the question about what is the possibility that China would get involved, or China or Russia would get involved if there was a bigger conflict.
Not by us.
Mr. President, my final question: if we wind up in a broader war, could you expect assistance from Russia and China, military and economic assistance from your allies, Russia and China?
We have always put our trust in God, and in God we trust, and we are capable enough to defend ourselves and to stand on our own 2 feet and to defend our country, our territorial integrity to the last drop of our blood. As I have said again and again, we don't want wars, we don't want to develop a nuclear weapon, and this false image, this wrong mentality created in the minds of the U.S. Decision makers and officials is because of the devilish machinations instigated by Netanyahu and the Israeli regime, and its policies based on warmongering. And the U.S. president should know that another war will only spread more instability in the Middle East, and it is not going to be in the interest or in favor of the U.S. president or the U.S. government to move in that or towards that direction. They instead need to choose peace and tranquility, which is something that I am and my government and my country are after. And
that part right there, I thought was really interesting. I am glad that he did ask him about that. That's a question a lot of us have been wondering, would Russia or China get involved? But what we're hearing here from the president of Iran is that he said, well, we would plan on defending ourselves, right? So it seems as though they're not trying to bring Russia, or he doesn't want to bring Russia or China into this. And I thought that was important for people to hear. I also thought it was important for people to hear him say that the U.S. should not pursue this option, that what we should pursue is peace. So once again, we are seeing where one of the countries that the U.S. says is our greatest enemy in the world, they're the ones calling for peace, and it's the U.S. that tries to escalate things. What are your thoughts there, Professor Marandi?
Yeah, I think, of course, again, that's one of the issues where in Iran, some people are criticizing him and they're saying he should have been more assertive about the United States and stress that the United States under Trump is carrying out murderous aggression, and that with such policies, coming to an agreement with the United States becomes virtually impossible, and that sort of thing. But I do think that the broader message is correct, and that basically the United States is the Iranians, first of all, are an independent country. What the Russians and the Chinese do, that remains to be seen, because at the end of the day, I'm sure that the Russians and the Chinese are very fearful of the behavior of the United States. The United States has gone rogue and trying to decapitate a country and to bring about regime change. That was the objective. The Americans and the Israelis tried to overthrow Iran, and they failed. Why? Because the United States and the Europeans believe their own nonsense. They believe that Iran is a house of cards. They've been saying that for years. Iran is corrupt, it's collapsing, it's falling apart, the people hate it. So what did they do? They went and slaughtered military leaders along with their families, along with their neighbors. And what happened? Nothing. The exact opposite. People rallied around the armed forces, the guards, the government, the state. In other words, the exact opposite of what the Americans and the Europeans were expecting and hoping. And what it did was that it united Iranians in a way in which I haven't seen since Saddam Hussein, backed by the West, invaded Iran. So that narrative collapsed. But the problem for Russia, for China, and for everyone, BRICS nations across the world, is now the United States is going about murdering heads of states, murdering leaders, and no one in the West is going to come. No one in the West protests about the assassination attempt on the Iranian president that was carried out by the Israeli regime. No one in Europe. No one is going to condemn it. And of course, why would they? When they are supporting the genocide in Gaza, that just shows that they have no moral values. They have no red lines. But that is something that the rest of the world is deeply fearful about, that the United States, the elites in the United States and the Europeans have collectively lost their minds. They have no red lines. They're willing to do anything in order to preserve this collapsing empire. And instead of rethinking their policy, instead of trying to pull back, cut spending, shut down most of these military bases across the world, try to restructure the economy, try to improve their relationships with other countries, what did they do? They double down, they support genocide, they attack countries, they impose more punitive sanctions, and they expect to get results, even though we continue to see that the situation goes downhill for the United States. It's quite amazing. And I'm not a historian, and I've read a bit of history, and I know you have too. Dying empires, from my understanding, as they go downhill, they become increasingly irrational. And the United States and its European partners, the elites, I believe that become very irrational. I think Trump's meeting with Netanyahu last night was actually yesterday was actually very ridiculous. And the way in which he was praising Netanyahu, praising a mass murderer in front of the world, that demolishes the little bit of credibility that the United States had in the eyes of the world and in the eyes of its own youth. Young Americans, as you point out, they know what's going on. And then they see the president praising the most monstrous person of our era in front of the world. That, I think, it just shows that how it reflects that broader my understanding that declining empires, they become increasingly irrational, detached from reality, and I think Trump is a good example of that,
Yeah,
which is dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, people should look at the fall of Rome. to see some of that irrationality that happens to
Exactly.
all of these empires. But to your point about Netanyahu meeting with Donald Trump, one of the conversations that was discussed at the table, at least in front of the media, was about what to do with Gaza. I do want to show this here again. You guys will see that Benjamin Netanyahu here is basically the one who's running the show. Donald Trump basically defers to him. Listen to this.
Is your Palestinian relocation plan still on the table? Is there a plan? Has there been any progress in finding countries?
Yeah, Bibi, why don't I let you answer that question?
Mr. President,
Wait a minute.
So they're asking him about the relocation plan for Gaza.
Wait, he's got to answer the question.
I think President Trump had a brilliant vision. It's called free choice. You know, if people want to stay, they can stay. But if they want to leave, they should be able to leave. It shouldn't be a prison. It should be an open place and give people a free choice. We're working with the United States very closely about finding countries that will seek to realize what they always say, that they want to give the Palestinians a better future. And those who, and I think we're getting close to finding several countries, and I think this will give, again, the freedom to choose. Palestinians should have it. And I hope that we can secure it close by.
And we've had great cooperation from surrounding Israel, surrounding countries, great cooperation from every single one of them. So something good will happen.
So I take a tremendous issue with this statement here. I know the volume was kind of low, but basically what Benjamin Netanyahu said was that those who want to leave Gaza will have the choice to do so, and those who want to stay can stay. Okay, I have a couple problems. First of all, the Palestinian people made it very clear that they don't want to leave their home. To me, this just sounds like ethnic cleansing. This whole thing about the way they're framing this as the freedom to choose. He said, we don't want them to be in a prison, but they've been in a prison all these years. It's called Gaza, where you close them off. He said they should be free to leave, but you never gave them that opportunity before. They weren't free to leave before. So now all of a sudden, Benjamin Netanyahu is coming to the United States and he's here and he basically makes it seem like he's trying to present himself as this I don't know, diplomatic person to basically make it seem like he's trying to give them another option when all these years they never had an option. So I take a tremendous issue with this remark here from Benjamin Netanyahu and for Donald Trump to basically just say, well, let's just defer to him. Disturbing.
You know, Sabrina, something that I know you know this, and I'm sure your audience does too, because they're politically aware people. But Hitler wasn't some crazy madman who was raving and screaming all the time. I'm sure when they were sitting at the negotiating table, he was very he sounded very logical. All of these monsters in human history, they had, in recent decades or centuries, they wore good clothes, they had perfume, and they ate, with their forks and knives, and they're very sophisticated. They watched, perhaps, they'd go and read Goethe, they'd listen to classical music. They saw themselves as humanists and as the educated, the heirs of civilization. They weren't just like screaming and yelling and all that. So these people around this table, they sit in their suits, but they're monsters. They're monsters. Every single person around that table is a monster. These are the most evil people on this planet. They're carrying out a Holocaust. And then they're talking about, the people have the choice. It's like, and the media tries to normalize this. And that's one thing that disgusts me about the likes of Piers Morgan. He tries to bring on these genocidal maniacs to normalize genocide, to normalize. It's like bringing on Hitler or his henchmen on TV and say, well, it's a debate. You have Hitler here, and you have his Minister of Culture here, or his Minister of Information here, and then you have the Minister of Information of Poland, or of, I don't know, Czechoslovakia, or whatever, some other country. And then, well, he says this, and it's like a rapist, putting him on, having a debate between him and his victim, and say, well, he says this, she says that. It's just normalizing, these monsters. A mass murderer. You bring him on TV. He sounds like a nice guy. Look, I mean, look at him. I'm sure, there was something provoked him into doing that. I don't know if I'm getting my point across. Normalizing monsters is, I think, the greatest crime of them all. Monsters are not the Hollywood figures that we often see, where they have these ugly faces or they look sinister and they're very openly evil and they're proud. No, that's not how these evil people work. They pretend that they're the good guys. They pretend that they're the reasonable people. They pretend that they want the interests of humanity to be preserved, and that it's those other people who are the problem. One day it's the Jews, one day it's the Muslims, one day it's the Christians, one day it's the brown people, one day it's the black people, one day it's the white. It doesn't matter. But the point is that they don't walk around raving like maniacs. I mean, you see it, you've seen speeches of Hitler when he's, yelling. That's not how he was in his meetings when they were negotiating with other governments. How someone performs on stage. But I think that what Western media tries to do is to make these very evil people look normal. And so ordinary people say, well, yeah, Netanyahu and Trump they are plotting against Palestinian children. They're plotting to exterminate them. That's how it is. And they are busy exterminating. So they can wear their suits and they consider all those journalists, they are part of this genocide. They're foot soldiers in this genocide. All of those people who normalize slaughter, it's like, I didn't see the movie, but there was a movie. I'm sure. Well, I can't say I'm sure, but for example, the Nazis who were in the concentration camps, right? Maybe when that Nazi commander, when he went home and he, with his wife and children, he was a really good father, and you could show him in that light and how he played foot. He's still a monster. You can present a monster in a very different light and make him look good. Look, he's such a decent family man. Look how well he brought up his children. This is what they're trying to do with these people. They're trying to normalize monsters. Monsters don't rant and rave necessarily. Monsters look like the rest of us. And they try to talk to the rest of like the rest of us because they want to convince the rest of us that they're not monsters. Otherwise, how in the world would Hitler be able to, and Hitler's just one example. I mean, they like to focus on Hitler, whereas there were many monsters in history. But I'm just saying this so that, a European or Western audience would better understand what I'm trying to say. How would Hitler be able to run a country and gain power and to build that army and to kill all these people if he wasn't able to, to speak to this group of people, to convince that group of people? If you're just ranting and raving, you're not going to get anywhere. So at the end of the day, my deepest concern is how, and the ugliest thing I see of all is not the way in which these Zionists bomb kids every day. They bomb tents full of kids, and they take pleasure in it. And they gather hungry people and they start gunning them down and take pleasure in it. That's not the worst. The worst of the worst of the worst, in my opinion, is these people sitting together and then journalists normalizing them and presenting these people as normal human beings, and that they're going about negotiating and offering concessions and offering solutions. No, they're not offering concessions or solutions. They're exterminating a people. They're carrying out mass slaughter. And the Western media is trying to provide them the cover to get away with it.
You're right. And I always say a lot of those corporate media commentators are actors because what we have seen when they're fired, when they're fired from these networks, like Joy Reid, for example, then they do these podcast tours explaining why they were fired. One of the issues that seems to continue to come up, Gaza. Oh, they didn't want me talking about Gaza. They didn't want me to talk about this, like that type of thing. So what we know is that they have already been told what narrative to have when it comes to Israel and Gaza and Iran. And behind the scenes, they know that it's wrong, but they still go out there every day and they give that narrative to millions and millions of people. And the reason why I continue to point to corporate media is because they control the narrative. Particularly with the older generation. A lot of older people here in the US tend to watch corporate media like CNN, ABC News, and Fox News, et cetera. Younger people are more open to YouTube, TikTok for their source of news and X as well. But the reality is that's where the narrative comes from. If from day one, after October 7th, if corporate media would have said, Hamas did this, but let us give you the backstory of, did you guys know the Palestinian people were occupied? Did you know that they were enclosed in this, basically in an open air prison, enclosed in this space, and they can't leave when they want to? No, they left all of that out. And people had to come to independent media to get that side of the story. Right now, Francesca Albanese, you're probably familiar with her. She came out with a report recently that lists all the companies that are profiting off of the genocide in Gaza. And that includes, for people who are not aware, that includes Massachusetts Institute of Technology, right here in Massachusetts. Like it goes so deep. It's not just the military industrial complex. It's not just Palantir. There are all these companies that are profiting off of that, including higher education. So shout out to Francesca Albanese for revealing that. And now you see they're trying to revive the October 7th sexual assault story again. They're grasping at all of these different straws.
I mean, if there was rape and beheadings on October the 7th, then why are they suddenly now saying, oh, we've found new evidence? But you said the evidence was there. They actually, if you recall, they showed this film that they wouldn't show us. They just showed their friends this film, and they'd come out and say, yes, it's so horrible. But they never showed any of us the evidence because there was no evidence. And now after 21 months, the very fact that they're saying, oh, new evidence has emerged, after 21 months, new evidence has emerged, that very claim shows that they have no evidence. And again, I go back to what I was saying in the previous, in my previous statements, that, evil people are not like in these crude Hollywood movies where they're, I don't know, what do you call it when you're there, they play with their hands, these sinister, like, in these, Hollywood cartoons or movies or Disney cartoons where the sinister person had a mustache and he had this evil look. That's not how it is. I remember once watching a documentary on Hitler, and like it was his secretary or someone, and she was saying, yes, he was a really nice guy. And yeah, it's like evil people are not like, they don't look like evil people as in the cartoon characters in Disney, or they're not like ranting and raving everywhere. They're just like everyone else. They may be very good parents, but they're still mass murderers. They're still killers. They're still racist. They're still ethno-supremacists. They still deserve to be face life imprisonment, if not more than that. But so we have to, that is what I think should be condemned the most, when people normalize murder, slaughter. As I said, it's like the rape victim and the rapist, and you bring them both and say, well, have your discussion on TV. Well, yes, of course, you can have a discussion, but what is the objective here? It is to diminish the magnitude of the crime, because you're normalizing this fiend, this evil person. And on the other hand, you gradually see how the victim, she becomes more critic. She's oh, she shouldn't have said that. Well, maybe if she hadn't done this, he wouldn't have done that. And then gradually, what is a clear crime, and the guy should be locked up for the rest of his life, if not worse. Suddenly, she becomes the problem. She wasn't well dressed. She wasn't, I don't know, she may have smiled when he said something to her or whatever. I don't know. But the point is that this normalization of what they do for Gaza. It's the same thing. It's not different at all. The rapists are at the table. The rapists are at the table, and they're sitting and discussing about solving the problems of the Gazan people, the victims. Those who are being, the woman who's being raped. It's no different, except for the fact that it's far worse, because it's not one person, it's millions of people.
That's right. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for your time.
Thank you, Sabrina. It's always a pleasure.
Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.